Staying with this primitive section, we're going to do a little bit more. So let's go ahead and organize our space just so we can draw a couple more objects. We'll go back to our primitives, and I'm going to draw another rectangle primitive here. And you'll see that that rectangle primitive actually is drawing it using the same settings as the last rectangle primitive, which is kind of cool because it kind of remembers what you've done, which is really quite fun. So now let's say if I adjust this particular object, there we go. So it looks more like a C. When I go back to that tool and try and draw another one, you'll see that it remembers the last settings that I had for that object, which is quite nice. So now that we've got a few more objects that we've drawn on the stage, we're actually going to go through doing strokes and fills on our objects just so we can play around with all the different things here. Now be aware that some of these are going to be drawing objects, and you can notice that they're drawing objects by the bounding box around them. And you'll see that some of them are shapes, and notice that they're shapes by the series of dot patterns. Right now everything is the same color, so that's kind of boring. So there are a couple different ways that we can change colors. In order to change colors, we typically want to select the item that we want to change the colors for. So if you click on a shape, you'll notice that it only selects, once again, that one part that you click on first. If you want to select the whole shape, you need to double click on it. Now it'll show you over on your fill and stroke settings, your fill and stroke color, and you can of course change these colors if you like at this point. Now if you select just part of an object, such as if I just select the stroke of a shape, I can just change that one item, which is quite nice. And then I can select the fill alone and change it. Oh, that's a really bad color combination. That's even worse. So there we go. Now you'll notice that we're very limited when we stay within this color dialog box when we want to change colors. Over on the top right hand side, we do have a color box here which allows us to bring up this color wheel, or color panel, which allows us to pick our colors much more accurately. And I think it's a really good idea to use this because you want to really avoid the top, I don't know, quarter of colors. The reason why, these are all RGB colors, but they're very bright and they look computery. As soon as you start getting into about 1/4 down or even 1/3 down in saturation, and that's what going up to down, we have fully saturated to unsaturated. That's why we have all gray at the bottom. You want to knock down the saturation a little bit because it makes colors look a little bit more realistic. And you can only really do it in a dialog box like this. So anyway, I'll choose a color that's a little less saturated, and you'll see maybe it looks a little different than some of the fully saturated colors. Now if you want to be able to be a little bit more interactive with this, bring up your color panel, and you can actually do this in that color box there. And you've got a little bit more control with that. Although it's a small box, you do have a fair amount of control. Now be aware that you also have alpha. You won't really see alpha applied until you apply it to something like a drawing primitive, which will actually go on top of other objects. So if I select a drawing primitive and change its alpha, notice when I drag this over the top of a shape, you'll see that it actually has that transparency, which is really quite cool. And we'll talk about transparency in later ones. So go ahead and give different color settings. You can also experiment with stroke settings, such as the ability to do different types of strokes, dashed strokes, or dotted strokes. And there's this one called stippled, but I do want to caution you about the ragged and stippled. You want to avoid using these. Typically solid strokes are going to be best, or even not having a stroke at all. And you can remove the stroke manually, or you can click on a stroke and change its color to nothing, and that will remove it as well. And in the next tutorial we will be playing with a few more options for our fills.